Hello, everyone. I'm Yukio Lippit, the Faculty Director of the Arts at the Radcliffe Institute, and it's my real pleasure to welcome all of you to this special event, the opening of an exhibition by the artist Xaviera Simmons titled Overlay in the Johnson-Kulukundis Family Gallery at Radcliffe. Now, the genesis of the exhibition by Xaviera Simmons that opens today can be located in the Institute's desire to conceive of a show that resonated with Radcliffe's research theme for the year, urbanism. This led us to explore a collaboration with the Cambridge Arts Council, which had been organizing a series of installations and performances by contemporary artists to celebrate the first remodeling and revisioning of the Cambridge Common in a generation, one that's curated by Dina Deitsch. Now, this series is organized under the title The Commons, Art in the Cambridge Commons, and is slated to begin in May, and we'll hear more about this in the conversation with the artist that follows. But because the Radcliffe Institute is adjacent to the Cambridge Common, we wanted to find a way, an artistic way, of exploring and opening up this adjacency. And by extension of opening up the Institute more generally, to understand further in ways that are creative, imaginative, even surprising, its resources, its archives, of querying further the relationship of its history to the contemporary world. And in this regard, we have found the ideal collaborator in Xaviera Simmons, and feel very fortunate to be where we are today, opening the exhibition. Simmons is a highly acclaimed artist whose work dynamically combines photographs, installations, performance, sound, sculpture, and other multimedia components. These various aspects are placed in kind of a perpetual symbiotic relationship in which they are mutually informing and enriching and cycling through one another to generate remarkable new worlds. Simmons' artistry is formally beautiful and highly crafted in terms of its formal elements, composition, color, scale, and so forth. And we're convinced that you'll agree with us when you enter into the gallery space. But this formal, remarkable formal beauty is not necessarily the artist's only or even primary concern. You might call one of her primary concerns the complex characters that she layers into existence, characters that are palimpsests of historical figures and contemporary concerns, placed within various unlocatable landscapes that are urban, rural, or natural, and that participate in open-ended, non-linear narratives, much like actors in a play or vignette for which the script is no longer available. It is because of this ambiguity that these personations, as we like to call them, accretions of specific types of experience and memory and lived history, become a springboard for further engagement and insight into the relationship between the archive, what we assume to be the relationship between the archive and the past, how one understands the inner lives of historical figures, and ultimately and importantly, the contemporary world itself. Simmons received a Bachelor in Fine Arts from Bard College in 2004. She completed the Whitney Museum's independent study program in studio art in 2005 while undertaking a 2-year actor training conservatory with the Maggie Flanagan Studio. And this training in acting and directing, I think, is a very important part of her practice overall, informing other aspects of her work. She's exhibited and performed at a wide range of major venues, including the Museum of Modern Art, PS1, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, Public Art Fund, the Sculpture Center. She's also the recipient of many prizes, including the David Driscoll Prize, the Jerome Foundation Travel Fellowship, Arts Matters Fellowship, Smart Power Fellowship. In 2012, Simmons was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and in 2015, she received the Foundation for Contemporary Arts grant. Now, at the Radcliffe Institute, her exhibition, Overlay, is rooted in the stories, images, and historical narratives found amidst the archives of the Radcliffe Institute's Schlesinger Library on the history of women in America. The artist engages with a set of Schlesinger collections that resonate with long-standing explorations, cookbooks, first-person travel narratives, images of women at work, architects, works about health, among many others. Simmons distills this multitude of voices and places them in a new contextual space, overlaying diverse languages, of which there are many, which you'll be introduced to in the show, and presenting a diverse cross-section of figures to enliven and inhabit the landscape of the gallery. In doing so, Simmons not only explores alternative possibilities for the figures in the archives, but repopulates the Schlesinger itself with new voices. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Overlay is part of a collaboration between the Radcliffe Arts Program and the Cambridge Arts Council, whose summer series on the Cambridge Common will feature a performance created by Simmons based on the exhibition. Now, before inviting the artist on stage for a discussion of her work, I'd like to mention that we'll be having a reception after the discussion, for which we will all move from here to Byerly Hall, which is where the gallery is located, 2 buildings down from here, to celebrate the opening and give you a chance to experience the show and meet the artist. I'd also like to take the opportunity, because so many people were involved in putting the show together, to thank, on behalf of Rebecca Wasserman, the Director of Academic Ventures, and Meg Rotzel, our Arts Program Manager, a number of people who are crucial to the realization of this exhibition. We'd like to thank Sean Wheely, a PhD candidate in the History of Art department here at Harvard, who was Xaviera's research assistant and crucial to the show. Our gallery preparator, Joe Zane, imbued the show with his own masterful artistry in helping to consummate the installation. Jennifer Burkett, who coordinated virtuosically the translators and speakers that are a crucial part of the show as well. Would like to thank Deanna Carey and the Schlesinger staff, who were so helpful and enabled so much the research that went into the personations that we'll be witnessing later on. Benjamin Schaefer, who lent much of his time and energy to our efforts, and finally to Xaviera herself, who, along with masterful artistry and intelligence, brought so much goodwill and generosity and enthusiasm to the show and gave us a new sense of what it means to collaborate with an artist. We are profoundly grateful to you, Xaviera. Now, our conversation this evening will be joined by Dina Deitsch, who is the curator of the Commons Art in the Cambridge Commons, and is also the John R. and Barbara Robinson Family Interim Director of the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts at Harvard. Previously, she was the curator of contemporary art at the de Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, and has taught and lectured widely, including currently as a guest lecturer at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And her record of achievement in the contemporary art world is extensive, and she was instrumental in the organization of the show. So we're very grateful to her, and we're delighted that she'll participate with us in this public conversation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dina Deitsch and our featured artist, Xaviera Simmons, to the stage. Well, there's so much to talk about your show and your artwork, Xaviera, and so I wanted to begin with your experience with the Radcliffe Archives itself. What you focused on, what caught your attention?
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here, of course, and I'll just reiterate thanks again to Yukio, Dina, Meg, Sean, and Becky, everybody. I'm Jen. I mean, there's beautiful faces here. So I'm really thankful to be here. So I wanted to say that. Okay, I'm here. So tell me the question again.
So the Radcliffe, yeah, sure. The Radcliffe Archives. What caught your attention? Tell us about your experiences in them.
Yeah. So I had just come off of doing a project in New York City first with the High Line, Friends of the High Line, and then with the Kitchen in New York City. And in that project, I had been looking at a lot of archival images. I mean, archive, that's such a strange word these days now. But I had been looking at a lot of images, a lot of homoerotic imagery, a lot of gestures. I had also produced my first choreographic work. So, and this is pre-election. So I came to the archives thinking a lot about first gesture still, and then, what the archive, or what the Schlesinger archive had inside of it. I mean, it's a really first step curious, And then for me, the process goes that I think about the language that the archive puts out there. Like, what does the Schlesinger advertise of itself? Like, what does it talk about? And it talks a lot about women's things, right? Like feminism with a big F, or feminist marches, or cooking, or I remember coming and seeing things about Julia Child, or thinking about, and then going a little deeper, and I saw, protest buttons, and then going a little deeper, and then I saw, oh wait, there's a huge travel section. A little deeper, there's like travel and affluence, and then there's this whole section of images, and then going a little deeper, and there's like these female photojournalists, and then going a little deeper, and there's this like amazing BDSM archive that the Schlesinger collected, and then going deeper, and there's like porn in there, and then constantly going deeper. And so I started off with a cursory look, like, oh wow, feminism, protests, right? And which is pretty deep, but there's so much in there. I mean, there's really a beautiful collection of like women and sexuality, which I was probably really excited about. I think because I had been thinking about that for my show at the Kitchen, so it just was natural to look for it along with themes that I already think about in my work, which is landscape, which is what's underneath landscape, and that American history, and that's how I begin.
Could we follow up on that a little bit? I mean, you have talked in the past about the interesting dialectical relationship between an archive which is so orderly on the outside, that it's very clean and arranged in a way, of course, systematically to allow us to access it, but that there is this inherent messiness therein, the messiness of the lives therein. And you also have a real interest in bringing out the kind of the sensuality of the archive, these seams that you hit, which are really about kind of the inner lives of the subjects of the archive. Could you talk a little bit more about your interest in these areas?
I think archives are sort of that word. Every time I say it, I feel tripped up with it, because I think, in terms of art making, that's sort of like one of those buzzwords, So I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it is an archive technically, but it's really like collections of people's items and things. So I remember one time Luc Sant wrote about my work, about a series of photographs that I produced, and he said that, he was like, I see a lot of dead people. And because I use a lot of like old images and images from the 70s, 80s, 60s, in some of my sculptural photographs. And so I can't help but go into an archive and feel the dead people, but at the same time, that's the first layer, right? That's like getting the box that the library gives you to research that you ask for. But then once you start to go through the contents of so-and-so's life, I mean, it's not all dead people, but a lot, you start to see, they start to come alive, right? Like I looked at, a few different travel writers and female journalists, photojournalists, like the first female photojournalist, her archives are here. And you really see a woman whose life took her from Cambridge, I believe, through all different parts of the world. So she sort of started to become alive to me, and I just kind of went on her journey with her. And that happened, I mean, I was coming here for, 6 months. So I just kept feeling first the weight of this person is not here anymore. And so I'm able to look through their things, their private thoughts, their private images. And then slowly, those private thoughts sort of started to give me life in terms of thinking about making an exhibition in the space.
It's really, archive is a difficult word. It's something more like a living repository of memories and experiences that you are engaging and finding a lot of future possibility with in general. But there's also an interesting timeline to your engagement with the Radcliffe repository of memories and experiences, which is that when we engaged you and when Dina engaged you for the Commons project, it was sometime in the middle of last year, and since then the world has changed quite a bit, and there is an interesting relationship that you've articulated between your work in the repository, in these other people's lives and memories, in that kind of memory space, and what's going on externally and how they mutually inflect one another.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we started talking, I don't remember what month, Dina? Summer of 2016, right? So that was pre where we are. And, you know, I had a certain, I don't want to say that I was complacent, right? Because I don't think as a woman in my body, you know, a Black woman artist, you know, who, I don't know that I'm ever complacent, right? Like, because it's a restless space, this being American here, and being, you know, a Black American here. So it's a restless space for me, but I definitely think that the hairs on every part of my body have been raised substantially since the election of the gentleman. And so I was, you know, doing a lot of research and coming to Cambridge and coming to the library and coming to Radcliffe and interacting with these archives. But at the same time, there were so many things happening so quickly, and there are. I mean, we're only 100 days into a conversation or monologue. You know, I couldn't help but like hear both sides, which is something I was talking to the students about earlier today. There's like two sides, you know, there's like the roots of the tree and then the kind of leaves of the tree. And I guess the archives was kind of like started to become the roots of the tree. And then the monologue and all of its branches started to be the, you know, tops of the tree. And that's what started to happen to me as I was thinking about the exhibition was, well, I want to maintain the conversation that we proposed in the beginning, which was thinking about the archives and thinking about how to distill a language from the archives. But I also had to start paying attention to what was happening here. And also what was happening here at Harvard. I was really impressed with the slavery, correct me with the correct term, the
University and Slavery Conference.
University and Slavery Conference. So, you know, I mean, I touch on that in the exhibition, and that had to do with my newfound friendship with Meg, who, you know, told me about it. And I had to touch on that. So that's like the branches, right? And all the flora of the tree was like what's happening now actually here. And then there's obviously the historical that had to maintain. So I think you'll see in the exhibition, there's like this kind of push and pull between then and now.
Vera, I wanted to jump in. I think, you know, it's interesting the image that you chose for the marketing and that we're looking at tonight, you know, it's not in the show per se, but I love that this is the image that led you to your entire project. And I'll let you talk about the installation as you would like, or there could be a great reveal, but it's interesting about how you move through the cookbooks, the Julie Child. We had a lot of conversations about cookbooks, I think. That was our big draw. We're like, look at that. And BDM was, you know, that was a big one.
BDSM.
Oh, BDSM, sorry. Outrageous
Women. That's does anyone know Outrageous Women? It's amazing. It was produced in Cambridge from like 1986 to 88, I believe, and it's a zine. I think there were only 12 issues, and it's the whole stack is in the library, in the Schlesinger library, and it's you know, little thin pages, but it was all this. It was right. I guess it was 80s, but pre the onslaught of AIDS, right? So you had like, it was a women run. It was a women run kind of sexual awareness magazine, specifically dealing with bondage and Cambridge. So really, really interesting. And like these women's imaginations. And it's weird, I looked up the author a while ago, and there's only one image of her, but there's no image. She has a Facebook page, but it's like a cat. So she went from being like tying women up and all this stuff and writing. She was the publisher and one of the writers, tying women up to now she's like the cat lady. Like there's only image, I've looked for her. I'm like, where is it? She still lives in Cambridge, but she's like got cats on her page. I'm like, I don't know how you do that, but.
So I was wondering if you might want to talk about the image that you did choose in a little bit. Although, you know, Cambridge and what was it, you know, bondage in Cambridge will stay in my mind forever. You know, how you know, the story and the narrative that you did end up choosing, which seems so timely about the moment we're in and, you know, the piece that you ended up producing.
Yeah. So this image is from Mary McNally, who was a photographer. She doesn't have a huge archive or a huge folder in the library, but she has a really substantial and significant one to me in that she photographed a 1980 UN conference. So I originally thought the installation was going to be a lot about images of travel and a conversation about like the opportunities that affluent women had to travel, and then how to distill that. But it really became about looking at these images. These are two of her images, looking at her images and thinking about how powerful the images were, especially they were taken in 1980, and where we were today. And I couldn't let it go. I was like, this looks like an image that it was right during the Women's March when I think I made this photograph, or those are not my slides, but that I decided that should be the cover, because she really paid attention to every single moment that was happening during this conference. So I just thought of the conference as the foundation for the exhibition and as the vessel to hold all of the languages and narratives that I wanted to build inside of the installation.
Well, can we talk a little bit more about that? Because again, you have this interesting relationship kind of temporally between the kind of time frames of these lives and histories that you're examining and then the contemporary moment. And this conference is also something that resonates with your understanding of the landscape of Radcliffe, your experience of the University and Slavery Conference. The exhibition itself takes on the format of a conference in a certain sense, as a conceit of a conference through the instrument and official kind of language of the conference you promulgate. Could you say a little bit more about how you understand the conference as a kind of a landscape or setting for your installation?
That's interesting. I took the idea of a conference. It's weird that word conference is another word like archive, I feel, in my studio practice, right? It's starting to, it's very filled with a lot of bureaucratic language, and it's very off-putting in a way. Like it's so, what's the word, microscopic? Is that the word when you want to look really close? It's both microscopic and macroscopic. Are those the two words? Like, when you go down and then when you go out? Is that microscopic, macroscopic?
Well, we understand.
You know what I'm talking about. So I don't know, conferences kind of do both things simultaneously, I find. I'm not sure that conferences really come to any kind of conclusion is the thing. And so that was really what I keyed in on, was I wanted to make a conference, which you'll see, I wanted to begin to construct a conference that actually had an opinion, I felt, that actually came to some kind of conclusion and actually promoted a society that I felt was more progressive in its language than where we are now, and also where we were in 1980. So I kind of used her images as the foundation to build another conference, another idea of a conference. I mean, it's still an official language in terms of if you read the text, but I invited 17 speakers, interpreters to interpret the text that I wrote, so that they could add, so there's like 17 different languages, so that they could add another element to this American landscape, bringing another bringing other languages to the forefront, that therefore populating the conference with a diverse population of women.
Can we, let me just, for the audience, mention that the sound component is a very important one for the exhibition, and you'll hear, as Xaviera said, many different languages, including Yiddish, Amharic, Yoruba, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Jamaican Patois, Hebrew, Farsi, Arabic, Hindi, and Japanese, translated and spoken by some individuals, I think, who are in this room with us today. And what was the, I mean, this is such a rich and interesting and a remarkable array of languages, but could you say a little bit about the logic of selection?
Well, first I started thinking a lot about Trump's travel ban, the Muslim ban, and I had to think about Arabic. I mean, I could not let that go. And I actually talk a lot about those in the text of the conference, which you'll see on the video. I actually continuously, well, I think 4 or 5 times, put those countries that he tried to ban, I don't even know where we're at, in the text. So that's one language set. And then I have a personal relationship to Amharic, which is just because a family member, really close friends, are from Ethiopia. I think it's a language that you don't hear very often in America, unless you go to certain enclaves. I also live with my partner who speaks 4 languages, well, besides English, 3 languages fluently. And so I'm constantly aware of how language, I've watched him travel, and when he goes to France, he's very like kind of stiff, you know, and tight. And then when we travel to Italy, he's very like loose. He gets into the, you know, he uses the language. And then when he travels to Spain, that's his favorite, you know, language. And I know when he speaks Spanish that's the one that feels most passionate and sensual to him. And so I kind of carry that with me in a lot of my work, and actually my first projects that were multilingual, I used him as the model for the project. So I like hearing multiple languages. I think Yoruba, I think Nigeria is 1 out of every 7 African on the continent is born in Nigeria. So I really thought it was important to have Yoruba in the dialogue. I can't, you know, each country in Africa has 20 different dialects that I can't own them all, but I could try to put some of them in there. Then it was important for me to have a language like Yiddish, right? Because I kept asking everyone, who speaks Yiddish anymore? Is it a living language? And that was a conversation.
Yes.
You do?
My parents do.
It's rare though, right?
Yeah, it's rare. It's smaller.
Yeah, it's rare.
Language, yeah.
And I couldn't let go of Hebrew, Yiddish. I was like, they both need to be in there. You know what I mean? They both need to live and exist together. And I think that has to do with looking at a lot of the terrain of some of the writers and travel writers inside of the archives that I was looking at, and who kind of reigned supreme in a way inside of the narrative of the archive that I was looking at.
Well, I think this jumps very nicely to this idea of landscape. And, you know, the way you describe language is really a form of embodying a landscape in a different way, about bringing different areas of the globe into one site, thinking about Cambridge as a global site in and of itself, thinking about the internationalism of this UN conference of the 1980s. And, you know, this sort of goes back to the original invitation where, you know, I invited you to come to do performances on the Cambridge Common, thinking about this overarching project about how we could bring performance into a public art context that were about this notion of connectivity, right? You know, the Cambridge Common, as a lot of us who live here or have lived here for the last several years know, that's been under renovation for like 3 years. And then they opened it up and we're like, oh, there's new pathways. That's great. Wow, that took a long time. But it's very beautiful. So we must celebrate it, right? And so what better way to do so than with real avant-garde practices And knowing your past work at MoMA and your other work at the High Line, thinking about that as an artist, that you've worked with archives as a performative material in and of itself, as a score, as a script, you became the immediate artist to invite, and of course Radcliffe as a neighbor, thinking about these notions of connectivity, how to bring as Yukio so nicely mentioned, thinking about the archive that's here in the Schlesinger, here at Radcliffe, out into the common, which is so close, yet psychologically and logistically fairly different space at the same time. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that next iteration of this project, because it's a really beautiful gallery installation that you've opened tonight. And then later on in about a month, we'll start doing performances, which will have a relationship, but fairly different at the same level.
I really have to thank Dina and Yukio and Meg and Becky and Sean again and Jen for their patience with me, because I tackle a few different types of work, practices, it takes me a while to I'm like a hawk. I oversee, I look over a landscape and then I slowly start to pinpoint. That's it. And it's almost like things start to, it's like a ping, you know what I mean? You hit, I recognize that that's what's the most important thing that should come up, or that's what's the most important topic. And so they've really let me have a very fertile time in the archive. So I originally planned on producing more like a tour in the Commons. First we were thinking of movement, and then I sort of settled in on a score, a tour, inside of the Commons. But then we had this really interesting moment where we went to the Cambridge Historical Society, and it really changed my whole perspective of the Commons, because one thing that the young man said, who he basically has resurrected the Commons, right? Or is he the main gatekeeper of the Commons?
Well, debatable. But I think it's also great that you called Charlie Sullivan a young man. I think he'll be very excited to hear that.
Yeah.
They've been in the last 30 years, it's been a very carefully maintained landscape, historicized very carefully so. So we had a lot of conversations about why the Common feels so lonely. It has a very empty quality. I think people come and go. It has a very commuter feel to it, but it had a history in the 60s of being a radical gathering site. That's where people came to protest. That's where you would go if you wanted to protest. Now, when people go to protest, I see a lot of people on the front hall of City Hall on Mass Ave. They go to Boston. I don't know if anybody protested in the last several months in January on the Common. It's very quiet. And so there was this question that we were bringing up, and when we went to visit it, why is it that way? And so there were multiple answers. Some people said getting gathering permits were really difficult suddenly. And then at the Cambridge Historic Society, they were like, no, people just stopped asking to use the space. So there was a bit of a question of, what happened. And they actually had renovated the Common in the 70s to allow for a greater gathering. And then their experience at the Historic Society and in the city, they said, well, people just stopped doing it. After a certain point in the early 70s, people weren't gathering to protest anymore, and it just fell out of the everyday action.
Well, it also fell out because, I guess, and I don't think folks can afford to stay in Cambridge and live here and claim it. And that was the main thing. That was my main takeaway from the experience was, it's a transient community in a way, which is very similar to MoMA, I will say. You know what I mean? That's a smaller community but in the sense that it's people, it seems as though, I don't live here, I know there are people who've lived here for many years and probably in the audience, but from what Charlie was saying, it seems as though people live here for a time to continue their education and maybe start families, but then they move elsewhere. So you don't have this sense of ownership of the space. And that's what really stuck to me. And that's, and I'm not, the project that I'm doing is not by any means owning the space, but I hope that it at least leaves an imprint on people's memories of the space. So it's gonna be 6 women inside of the space responding to the exhibition through text, through spoken word, and through we have wind instruments and string instruments, so, and through classical and jazz. So I hope to create kind of a sound environment and also a text-based environment that has some movement and some color that resonates with the installation, but that also kind of leaves an imprint of one way to use the space.
I mean, there's so much there. It's again, once again, this complex layering in the afterlives that you imagine for the characters that you kind of will into to being, and the way the different components of your artistic practice really mutually inform one another. And I think, in conclusion, I think we just like to point out that Xaviera is a remarkable wordsmith in her use of language. And we heard about the soaring hawk, but another way that she describes her method is as the hungry worm that burrows through archives. That's not an image that librarians and archivists like to hear too often, but it's remarkably effective, and she has effectively burned a hole through many interesting kind of collections here. And another word that will really whet your appetite for the gallery itself is that of the maximalist. That you are a maximalist in your approach to space, in the way you've conceived of the gallery and its kind of the environment itself. And I think that's something that people will immediately grasp when they enter into the gallery itself. And so with that, I'd like to invite everybody to join us in the reception at Byerly Hall to witness Xaviera's exhibition and the reception. Before we go, I'd like to thank once again Xaviera Simmons and Dina Deitsch for this conversation, and Xaviera for the exhibition. Thank you so much.